All right. Hey, I think we can slowly start and perhaps bit by bit some additional participants will join in. Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the earlier program so far. My name is Alex. I'm serial entrepreneur, having gained quite some experience in setting up enterprises and running them. And today I want to share a little bit from this experience, basically with the idea of information, inspiring, but also advising you on maybe your startup journey. So we coined this topic the startup way. And if we speak about the startup way, this usually would mean that there's also some other ways. And from my personal experience of what I experienced during my studies and when starting with my professional life, I distinguish between public organizations, corporates, and startups. I think I got lucky that I was able to be part of each of those three for a little while and with some for a bit longer. But the key message here is that those three are very different from each other, very distinguished. Like when it comes to responsibilities, like you as a starter will of course have very different responsibilities when joining or setting up your own startup versus joining a corporate with hundreds of thousands of employees. And that of course also defines your career, like starting as a junior engineer, as a junior analyst, and like slowly then climbing your way up, having more and more activities, having more and more responsibilities, versus looking at a startup where you basically already start as a managing director or CTO. But yeah, what does this actually mean if your whole company only has one or two team members? A big distinction is to be made on processes, like where in a startup, usually you don't have any processes at all until you maybe 5 or 10 people, versus corporate, small or medium-sized enterprises where there's a particular way on how you're supposed to do business or engineering transactions, versus working in the public sector where these processes might even be long, like because you're going to be accountable to different stakeholders, including the public. And of course, benefits. I think that's going to be a big topic for all of you. What will you be earning right now when starting? What will you be earning later on? And what kind of chances do you actually have to, if this is what you want, to become a millionaire? I think there's a few graphs of kind of anticipating what will you be earning, like if after an education, after your bachelor, after your master's, when joining either of them. And maybe the most different from each of those three sectors on organizational types are the people who are working there, where I believe that different organizations and different organizational types will attract different people, and those people will be either happy or unhappy working with and within this organization. So at the end, like when it comes to the question of like, what's the right fit for me, working for a ministry, working or for a city or for a province, or working in a small or medium-sized company, working in a corporate, or working in a startup, setting up one. It really boils down to like, who are you right now and who do you want to become? And for that question, of course, there's the first one is to look into personality tests. I think that there's quite a few free resources you can look into. The Myers-Briggs one, for example, is quite an interesting one to look into your personality profiles. But if you type in personality tests, startups, corporates, whatsoever, I think you're going to come up with quite a few. And of course, it's not black and white, but they're going to stimulate you of figuring out, okay, what's important for you, what is not. And at the end, it's also about just trying it out. And I assume most of you are still young enough, that you could also lose maybe 1 or 2 years in a practical sense. Well, actually, it's going to be educational no matter what. It's going to be a great time for personal development, for professional development. So don't overthink it too much. Like now it's those formative years after your studies, where you just also have to try different things out. And also no company is like the other one. So you might also gain very different experiences working in one big construction firm here in the Netherlands versus the other one. And that's also just part of starting your journey as as an employee or as an employer, as a team member, and also just as a person. So the only thing what I can do actually for you right now is to a little bit share my journey and the considerations and the turns it took. And maybe some of those things will trigger you, inspire you, and or just start a discussion. So yeah, if you have any comments, any questions, please collect them. I can't see the window, unfortunately. So I think you guys have to wait until the end of the presentation, and I can answer some of them afterwards. So, but who was I in the past, and who did I become? So I originally from Germany, born and raised in Frankfurt, and then started my studies in mechanical engineering, business administration. And for me, I studied mechanical engineering because my grandfather was designing motorcycles. Horex, the company doesn't exist anymore, but it was quite prestigious in the past. And he was super passionate about this. And I loved kind of visiting him and seeing all the screens he had when there were just Atari machines and like very, very old school monitors to look at, and his drawings and all those things kind of I took with me growing up. And then I studied business admin to it because, yeah, my father told me so. So I thought, okay, well, this studying both, there's barely something to do wrong. Particularly in Germany, of course, there's a long history and heritage in mechanical engineering. So for me, it seemed like that I was properly set up for success, even though I didn't know what success means at this time. And to be honest, like there was a lot of pressure, a lot of tests. It was super difficult, and I looking back, there was very little personal development. Maybe it has to do with the educational system in Germany, which I know differs from the Netherlands, but we have very little real time or real life examples. We didn't have any project work or teamwork. It was very dry and yeah, kind of boring, and really not what I envisioned. The only topics which I was somehow interested in was on innovation management, which I always envisioned was like, yeah, creating something from scratch, like changing the status quo. And those things kind of were what triggered me, but it's definitely not what I was experienced during my studies. So I was getting super excited that part of my studies were internships, where I said, okay, maybe now I just have to learn the basics, but then once I implement it, once I apply it in actual context, it's gonna get more interesting. And I think there came my second realization of innovation management, of like how I envisioned it, isn't happening per se in a corporate, or even not even an innovation consultancy, where I realized that when I was going with my ideas of shaping new products, new services, people were looking at me and saying, yeah, but that's not how the process works. That's not how we are doing this. That doesn't fit. So I also got super frustrated working in consultancies, in bigger corporates, and also doing just summer jobs as analysts in other firms. So that was kind of another blowback, at least for my ambitions. And I kind of noticed that there's a fundamental mismatch of what I want and what I've been given so far and what I've discovered. After all, I said, okay, like now I've been studying, I think almost 8 years, like with those two studies. I thought, okay, now maybe it's a Germany thing. Maybe I just have to leave Germany in order to make something more international. And at this point, an opportunity came up to have a traineeship with the European Space Agency, ESA. So basically the smaller brother of NASA, of how you would refer to it. And maybe for some of you, this could also be interesting. So have a look into the program. It's called Young Graduate Traineeship, YGT. And every year they have dozens of positions all around Europe. One of the technical centers is here in Noordwijk in the Netherlands, but they also have offices in France, Paris, in Rome, in Italy, and also Spain. So very, of course, European. And there I was working for the Inspector General as a project management trainee. And I kind of thought, space technology, does it get any more innovative than that? Like having all these opportunities. And I have to say, I wasn't necessarily the extreme space nerd. Of course, I had affiliation to it, like growing up with the Star Wars and Star Trek, but I knew that other people have been living their whole life on that topic, and I was pretty much a newcomer. Nevertheless, my idea was, okay, cool, project management, working with satellites, working with robotics, working on engineering, and as a project manager, working for the Inspector General, pretty much having all the insights in all the missions which are happening at the moment. And within this year, of course, I met amazing people. I learned about space technology. I learned about the missions, and I was actually even in charge of the launching schedule. So it's, at least when I was working there, was an Excel table where you had to type in which mission with which kind of launcher when, and if there has been a delay in the project, and basically you had to find a different time slot. Pretty much like trying to arrange a video call nowadays. It just took a bit more time, but it was pretty much the same principle at this time. So this was my job. But I realized even at this level, what was done by the European Space Agency is actually not developing new satellites, new instruments, not developing new innovations, but actually checking that those things are being done properly by industry, being properly done by big organizations like Thales, like Airbus, being done by medium-sized, small enterprises here, or from the local environment, from universities, but also being done by startups. And that was kind of my first connection with the startup world. Here, the European Space Agency has a program. It's called the Technology Transfer Office. And those guys are responsible for checking out what kind of innovations there are outside of the space field, which could be implementable for space tech. A lot of innovation is happening actually from Formula One, which is now being used for space technology, or the other way around, of technology being developed for space, but which could be used for terrestrial applications. So I think all of us know the example of Velcro and PFAL, but there's many more actually of innovations which have been developed over decades with millions, sometimes even billions of budget, which are now being used for terrestrial purposes. And this really triggered me, this idea of, okay, technology transfer, and even better, maybe being the startup to develop this technology. And part of this technology transfer office, they have something is called the European Space Agency Business Incubation Center, whose job it is to actually help upcoming entrepreneurs who want to make use of space technology for terrestrial purposes. And yeah, at this point, when I was finishing my traineeship, I basically had the option of, on the one hand, continuing with ESA, which then looking back to my experience with ESA, with internships I had in my studies, I had to reflect, I wasn't inspired. I was rather bored. I was restless. I felt out of place. Of course, the benefits and the perks were great, and of course the team members as well. But it didn't seem to be really a click. So the offer to continue there, or on the other hand, I met a great guy who was part of the ESA Business Incubation Center, who also worked at the European Space Agency. And he was working on new technology, which was actually used for the International Space Station to recycle the air which is breathed out by the astronauts in order to recycle it and create new oxygen. So pretty much like an artificial tree. So we started speaking, I started getting really hooked on the technology, but also just on the prospect of doing things differently, really getting your hands dirty. And I think by doing things, by innovating, by building, by selling, and I think that's quite a good comparison here. Those two pictures left, my work at the European Space Agency, and on the right, like what we've been doing with our first company, Skytree. And here, I think that leads me a little bit to this comparison. Okay, what is a startup? What is a startup for me? Startup is really hands-on. So you're actually doing things, whether it's technology development, whether it's selling, whether it's investigation, whether it's growing a company, growing your team. It's very dynamic, meaning that pretty much in the beginning, no day looks like the other one. There's so much things to do, and you only have so little time per day, and so many different priorities. So it just needs to be dynamic by default. And of course, the point is that because you're small and nimble, can you be operating much faster than big organizations? So there's more progress to be achieved in a shorter time. And of course, startups are created from scratch with the goal of growing. So if your ambition is to just remain with 2 or 3 people, then I wouldn't call it a startup. Then you would call yourself maybe an engineering office or an innovation firm or something like that. But the startup usually comes with this prospect that whatever you're doing, there's going to be more and more demand for that, for which you need to have more people. There's going to be more revenue, and there's going to be eventually an exit. So that's from my perspective of how we define startups from the venture capital corner. And those are all true, and it's amazing. And I really was finding the things which I've been missing throughout my studies, during my internships, and during my work at ESA. But on the other hand, of course, you also have it's life consuming. It pretty much takes all the time you have, not only during the day. You're most likely going to be sleeping about this, and it's going to be the first thing you're going to be thinking in the morning, most likely the last one before going to bed. It's super stressful. Like it's a pressure cooker. And of course, it's also risky. Like it's often if it's not the money you take and invest in your company, then it's at least the time you're spending. Like it's and you don't know whether there's going to be a good outcome. You don't know whether the product or the service you're developing eventually is going to be groundbreaking, going to be disruptive, and going to be demanded by many different customers and different users groups. So that is something to keep in mind when speaking about startups. And maybe some of you already worked for a startup, or maybe even started one yourself. So please add in the bar other thoughts you have on the ups and downs of startups, and like also just discuss this with each other on that end. But coming back to Skytree, because I want to tell you a little bit about the journey of the startup way of my first company. So just to recap, we started with the technology which was developed for the International Space Station to capture carbon dioxide, so CO2, from the astronauts, to collect it, and then basically split it up again into the different components in order to create oxygen and also water, and then even other components from that. And the researchers who have been working on this for many, many years, they came up with a special material, which you see on the top left. It pretty much works like a sponge. So with time, it starts capturing more and more CO2 on its surface. And then you basically use pressure and the heat swing in order to release it. So what you have is concentrated CO2 afterwards, which you can then break down again through physical and chemical processes. But the first step is indeed kind of this absorption and the release of CO2 in a higher concentration. And the super interesting part is here, of course, hey, let's do it. Like let's build this for terrestrial applications. Let's see what kind of CO2 contents we have here in the ambient air, and how can we focus it and concentrate it in a way that it can be used, for example, for industrial processes, where concentrated CO2, for example, is needed for greenhouses, for plants to grow faster, or indeed for capturing CO2 from the atmosphere in large scale in order to do something about climate change. So there have been tons and tons of different applications where CO2 is actually not only a bad thing, but somehow a good thing if you know how to operate it properly. And our technical goal at this point was to develop more prototype, increase the efficiency, and also at one point work on the design. So here you see a little bit of iteration from the first prototype towards the second, basically two separate ones where they could try different setups, different temperature swings, different pressure injections, different amounts of material. But then at the end, of course, you also have to figure out to whom do you want to sell this, and who's going to be the customer. And we found one sector in the private use where CO2 is actually needed. And maybe some of you have an aquarium, freshwater aquarium. Then if you have plants in the aquarium, they also need CO2, like plants outside of the water. And at the moment, you have to use cartridges, which are actually quite expensive and also create quite a bit of waste. So what if you could just capture the CO2 from the air? So we developed a prototype, which we then also demonstrated and showed to the leading aquarium manufacturers. But of course, there was only one of the short-term markets. The long-term one was in order for heating and ventilation within buildings, to kind of tackle the CO2 build-up in more and more energy efficient buildings, which means that there's a worse air exchange, and you have to do something with the CO2. And then, of course, at one point also for large-scale industrial processes, plus, of course, the large-scale removal of CO2 from our atmosphere, where we developed also design concepts, as you can see on the right. And it's continuing like this, step by step. We basically entered different markets that made different propositions until we eventually found our launching market in the automotive sector, where we're now working together with companies like Toyota, Tesla, and Jaguar Land Rover to make this technology part of the future vehicle fleet. So if things go well, this might be a technology similar to air condition. It started in a few luxury models and eventually it became cheaper and cheaper with time. So that we can find such technologies in pretty much every car around the world. And one side was, of course, the technology development, which was great to actually get your hands on. But another big part was also growing the company, growing the team. And here you can see it started with two. Left hand was doing a conference in Germany. But it was still possible to sit that close to each other, enjoy a drink outside. Then finding another co-founder who was helping on business development and sales. And here you see an old picture in the International Space Station, but just a mock-up where the reporter of what was it? Quote wanted us to be free floating. So now it's very awkward to look back to this, but at this point it seemed like a great idea. Our first intern, and then suddenly we were able to hire our first PhD researcher, plus additional technicians and researchers, and that kind of slowly growing bigger and bigger, having more and more clients, changing locations from Noordwijk towards Amsterdam, where we first were just working in a co-working space, towards having our own laboratory in the science park. So, of course, that was not, as it now looks on the pictures, a straight journey. There were a lot of ups and downs, but after all, it's of course a great learning experience, and it really shapes you as a person and as an entrepreneur. And kind of looking back at this part of my life, my key learnings there was space technology. Like that is something what I'm super excited about, and where I saw so many different opportunities to make an impact on Earth for social and environmental issues. You were able to actively contribute to sustainability topics, so not only like speak about them, like to share articles which you're interested in, or have this as a side outcome of your work, but that was really the reason why we did it. We learned about how to grow a team from 2 people towards 4, 6, 8, and eventually 10. And of course, we realized how important it is to not only do our own thing in our own team, but also to form great partnerships with other engineering, with other technology firms and other businesses in order to form a community around the technology. But that, for example, was for me, as I said, that was a great part of my personal journey, but I have to move on. But I realized, particularly when it comes to hardware, to deep tech propositions, they take a lot of time. Like you're not going to have an exit after 2 or 3 years. You're not going to see the immediate impact within 5 years, maybe not even within 10 years. It's a long game, and you have to figure out, okay, will you be able to do what you're doing right now for the next decade or maybe 2 decades? And for me, then I knew not particular on this technology, maybe not particular on this company. I would like to be faster, and somehow in my lifetime as an entrepreneur, I want to have even more social and environmental impact. And then what I also kind of came across at this point was what was being developed is the lean startup methodology, and basically kind of a blueprint on how to create successful ventures, not only through trial and error, but like a bit of a method, a bit of a schematic, which is set up from the 3 points of build, measure, learn. So there is an interesting book, The Lean Startup or the Startup Way, for people who are more used to the corporate environment. Say, actually, you can run a startup as a scientific experiment. So you're going to have a hypothesis, basically a research question. You're going to identify there what are the key assumptions in your hypothesis, in your business plan, and you're going to be focusing on those key assumptions, which really going to make or break the whole idea around your startup. Basically, identifying this biggest risks, and based on this biggest risk, you're going to try to create tests in order to de-risk or in order to prove that this risk is not to be overcome. You make this test, you run the test, you collect the results, you analyze and rethink, and then what we call you pivot or you persevere. And you do this loop over and over again with each hypothesis, with each assumption, with every risk, and always focus on the biggest, most impactful factors. And this way, you're not going to be distracted with parts which are not essential to your business. And you identify what really distinguishes you as a company, as an enterprise from competitors, what really is disruptive for the market, and what is just a different way of doing this. So you want to avoid reinvention. You really want to be creating something new, because otherwise all the odds are against you if you want to compete with established players. And with this new learnings, with this new understanding, I kind of said, okay, great, I work with hardware now. What else is there in the space world? And for now, I only found this picture on the internet to show you a little bit on what else there is. And if you're interested in the sector, just go on Technology Transfer Office of the European Space Agency, just do a little bit more research on this. But space technology is all around us, basically. And it ranges from navigation, so the GPS that you have right now, actually, those are a formation, a constellation of satellites, which are also being relaunched every year with this higher accuracy, with better coverage. We speak about telecommunication, where we are able to use SATCOM telephones, and soon with SpaceLink, also receiving high-speed internet in the most remote places. And we're speaking about satellite Earth observation, where we have flying cameras in space which can look down on Earth, making pictures, using other instruments in order to measure, for example, subsidence of how the soil is moving, or analyzing the rooftops in cities, identifying what are green roofs, what are blue roofs, or even identify the potential for roofs of PV. We're speaking about robotics, we're speaking about medicine, we're speaking about so many different possibilities which space can bring for Earth in a positive way. And again, that was so inspirational for me that I said, that is something I want to do moving forward. And maybe some of you have additional ideas already, or have been intrigued in their childhood by another technology. So also please share them in the chat with each other. And maybe you also have other resources you want to change, but just look into it. There's pretty much space tech all around us, and we barely know about it. So with this understanding, with this new drive and purpose, I started a company called Overwegingen, so in 2017, with the idea of crowdsourcing elevation measurements, so height measurements, for better flood risk assessments and mitigation measures around the globe. So the logic here was for flood risk assessments, you need to know exactly how high a particular point is. And here in the Netherlands, we have very good height models, digital elevation models. Well, if you go into developing countries, you sometimes have inaccuracies of plus minus 10 meters. Of course, that's pretty bad if you think about then predicting of whether an area will be underwater or above water. So we were trying to figure out what is an easy way of collecting these height measurements and to make them available for non-profits, for governments, and also for commercial entities and construction firms who would like that. And for us, the easy and affordable way of doing so, we thought, let's think about smartphones. They have more and more sensors. Basically, like kind of a smartphone is almost like a smart measurement device by now. So can we develop an application which can actually make these measurements and share them with the global community? Maybe gamify this a little bit. At this point, the whole topic of Pokemon Go and the race was up and coming. So we thought, wouldn't this be a great idea? And we even struck a corporate partnership with CGI, a big IT development firm, in order to help us. And we were accepted by the European Space Agency. And of course, the space technology which we utilized here was the use of satellite navigation, knowing not only where you are and on the plane level, with the help of GPS, but actually using the new Galileo navigation satellites of Europe in order to also get an accurate reading on your height. So that was the starting point. And for me, of course, it implied much bigger social impact, basically helping people for avoiding harm and maybe even saving lives by having better flood predictions and using this as information for urban developers and also local governments. So my key learnings here: strong impact focus, and of course the benefit of when you work with data is that you can have a prototype quite quickly. You don't need to work 1 or 2 years on something, but you can actually have something what is working in a very short time. But what happened here, the big learnings was, if something is useful, it doesn't mean that it's valuable. And the difference is useful, it adds somehow, it helps somebody, but does it help somebody enough that they would pay for that, or somebody else would pay for that? And I think that was a very frustrating experience to realize there's a lot of useful things, but only few of them are valuable, which could actually help you as a business, because at the end, business needs to make money. We thought about setting it up as a non-profit, but besides that, we realized, okay, this corporate startup partnerships, what we intended with the CGI, also didn't work out. So it was another blow, basically, against what we wanted to achieve. And at the end, we also realized when working with the public sector, we're like having at least working on a global scale and the global south, we have very little budget for innovation. What they're interested in is proven technology, which have been developed over decades, preferably, and already has been tested and verified, and is maybe in operations already for the last years. So there's very little risk taking in the public sector, which is not a good starting point for a startup, which is proposing not only a new technology, but also a new business model around that. So a lot of thought has been put into it. The good thing though, it only took us around 3 months to create a prototype, and then maybe another 6 months to get this feedback in and realizing, okay, good intentions, but we're just going to be losing our time here and losing our money. There's no way of how we could make this happen, or how we could make this successfully happen in the next few years. And then 2 things happened at the same time. The first one was BAM approached us and said, hey, listen, we hear you work with a smartphone in order to make height measurements. Would this approach perhaps also work with roads, looking at highways? Can you use smartphones as smart measurement devices also in different contexts? And we were saying, yeah, actually, the prototype works. It doesn't really matter whether we put it on the ground, so we put it into a car. And we realized, wow, okay, actually, it is something what could be both useful and what could be valuable. And actually the industry working then business to business, at least with construction firms, they had innovation budget, they were willing to take risks. So we realized, wow, okay, that we might get something onto it. And it actually started with, let's create more data with the help of smartphones about roads. But then speaking with engineering firms, with construction firms and public authority, we realized actually the problem the road construction industry is facing is not just about having another or wanting to have another app in order to make measurements, but it's more about needing more big data sources and making better use of them to eventually get to the holy grail of predictive road maintenance. So we realized that there's actually much more to it, which led us to say, let's create a separate company for that. Let's call it Rodeo, which also implies a little bit the Earth observation, because also satellites can be used in this context. And we set it up as a separate entity. There's a parallel presentation right now where the current managing director, Joris, is going a bit deeper into that, but I also prepared a little video. I'm going to show this to you in a minute. So that was one, and it was very strong proposition. What I noticed though is that it maybe was from a social environmental perspective not as impactful as I wanted. Like when I started my journey then again as a serial entrepreneur. So what happened was say, okay, rodeo going to take most of our time during the day, but we still have the nights, we still have the weekends in a way, and we formed a group called Space for Good. Where we used our skills as data scientists, as software developers, as kind of context meta specialists of using space technology for social environmental good, and doing this all like with local initiatives, doing a lot of pro bono work, consultancy work, and kind of struck a balance. So those two things pretty much happened at the same time. And to spoil already on how things evolved, they actually grew quite rapidly also in parallel. But let me first show you the video of rodeo, and there should be some sound. If not, I can share the link later on with you.
We all use roads, whether it's our daily commute or a family vacation. The road takes us there and back again. So it's essential to keep our roads in optimum condition. Road inspection is a labor-intensive activity with periodic inspections and is often incident-driven. So you're always one step behind. But what if there's an easy way to monitor all roads at all times? That's where Rodeo can help. We offer data-driven road quality monitoring and predictive maintenance, combining a variety of big data sets. This allows for more efficient planning of maintenance, saving up to 30% on labor and materials, while reducing CO2 emissions, water usage, and road downtime, improving traffic safety and ride comfort, so we can all enjoy the road. Rodeo, road quality monitoring and predictive maintenance at the touch of a button.
All right. So if you want to learn more about this, check out the website and also get in touch with Joris, who's leading the company and so actually preparing now for a bigger investment round, which allows us to work even faster on the global issue of road quality monitoring and prediction. I see I don't have too much time, so I'm sorry if I have to speed up a little bit. But here again, the key learnings were highly useful and valuable. Paying launching customers this bump, and also highly scalable, because we realized like roads are not that different from one country to the other. So there's a potential to make a global proposition, matching the needs of engineering firms, construction firms, and also local governments. But there's always a but, I think, in your personal and your professional journey. Construction industry speed and mindset. Even though they were willing to innovate, we again not speaking of change within days or weeks or months, but you need a coalition of the willing. You need a lot of people joining you who have been doing things differently for a long time. And I think any change is like hurtful for a few. So you have to look out for those early innovators, the early adopters who are willing to experiment and test with you. For me, it was, again, like the impact side was maybe not as prominent. On the other hand, of course, it was highly valuable and highly scalable. And what happened is, of course, there was a rapidly increasing workload, both with Rodeo, where we had more and more requests, where the team was growing, but also with Space for Good, which step by step basically evolved from a pure consultancy network towards a project office, towards developing our own applications. And particularly in 2019, 2020, I was at the point of time where I had to make a decision. I can't duplicate myself. I have to make a choice. What do I want to do full time with all my heart and time? And for me, it was let's bring Space for Good to the next level. Here you see a little bit of an overview of Space for Good, of our team. Right now we are 10 people, like with a few interns and freelancers, now 18. We're using satellite Earth observation in order to map and track social and environmental impact. So it's like monitoring complex ecosystems It's the assessment and mapping, and of course also the predictive analytics, the modeling of complex ecosystems, where in contrast to rodeo, which is very much focusing on road quality monitoring, we're actually working a lot of different sectors, ranging from nature conservation and regenerative agriculture towards disaster management and also peace and justice applications. So again, a very strong focus on the impact side. And for me, it kind of showed endless opportunities and the highly personal alignment of like those things never felt like work, and I don't mind doing extra. So I kind of arrived in my sweet spot. Well, at least it feels like this at the moment. But you have to be aware when you don't work on a product, you most likely end up in a project and consultancy trap. This means you get, if you're successful, you get more projects, you make more money, but you also need more people, which costs more. Which costs you more, which means that you need more projects, and it kind of goes on and on and on. And the only way out of it is indeed if you think about products and applications which can scale beyond just having to hire more and more people. Again, working in a non-profit sector, they're not as keen on working with novel, innovative technologies. Their mandate is to help people, not necessarily to try new technology. So there's a lot of resistance coming in if you come with new data sources, new analytics. But again, like similar to authorization and with rodeo, you just have to find the right customer segment, the right group you want to speak to. And different from rodeo, like where rodeo really want to solve the problem of data-driven road quality monitoring, Space for Good is always going to be a contributor rather than the complete problem solver. So when it comes to the concept of sustainable forestry, we're not going to have an end-to-end product service. We're always going to help forest managers and maybe other data analytics companies to include additional perspective, like a sixth sense, if you want to say so, using satellite Earth observation.
Alex, I think we have to make an end on this one. So I think there's one question in the chat, if you can look at it.
Okay, let me. Okay, what is the question? Can you read it out?
Yeah. How did you found funding for your projects?
Okay, it's a very good question because it allows me to show you the last slides with practical ones. And let's start from the end. Funding, there's no shortage of money out there, to be honest. If you need to have your first 20, 50, 100,000 euros, it's rather easy to get this money. Like look into starter loans. If you join an incubator like yourself or High Tech XL, most likely they're going to give you 20, 25,000 euros as a loan, which is not on which you're not personally liable. There's the MIT grant every year, which can give you up to 20,000 euros. There's a lot of pitching competitions getting you another 5,000 or 10,000 euros. So the point is, actually money is not the issue. It's rather realizing that money is just a means to an end. And you have to realize, am I spending my time, which is maybe the most valuable resource you have, in the best manner? And that's, I think, where you have to figure out what is the problem I want to solve? How passionate do I feel about this problem? Am I willing to spend the next 3, 5, 10 years in just focusing on this one problem and coming up with a solution no matter what? And here the logic is that the problem has most likely 99 solutions, but the solution you might have come up with might not have a problem. So start always with the problem. Don't reinvent the wheel. If, like they say, if you want to make it in the market, you really have to be different from what the competition is offering right now, which means that you preferably should be 10 times better or 10 times cheaper. Usually both doesn't work. Try to do things in 3 months instead of 3 years. And I think kind of looking back, the number one quality you need is resilience, because there's going to be good moments, but they're going to be matched, at least in the first few years, at least 2 or 3 times with as many negative ones. So be up for a bumpy ride, but at least for me, it was really worth taking it. And for me, there's no other option for continuing my entrepreneurial journey of using space technology for social environmental impact. But for everyone, this is different. So look into yourself, think about who are you right now, and where do you want to go? And then maybe we're gonna see each other on the starter way or the highway.
All right, Alexander, thank you so much. And thanks everyone for listening. And hopefully see you guys in another session. Have a good day today.
Okay. Bye everyone. Thank you.